All right, what about now? Okay, cool. Looks like we got some audio. Cool, cool. And getting everything set up. We'll start in just a second. Coolio. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Um, this week we are going to follow up on some of the brainstorming that we did last week. Last week we talked a lot about systems and requirements for building a cozy restaurant manager. Um, we are planning on using AI for a lot of the underlying systems in that manager to let the player type in their own choices of what they want to sell in their store or um, basically things they want to do for customizing their restaurant. And a lot of the AI will produce either systems or items or like routines around the area for them to be able to go harvest what they need in order to sell those things or make those things. So, for example, if you are opening up a store and you really want to sell shepherd's pie, um, we'll get into like how this is all input and the flow and everything later, but in a very basic sense, you type in shepherd's pie, and in the back end, we're generating an ingredients list for shepherd's pie. Um, yeah, this is all just placeholder stuff right now, but you generate that ingredients list for shepherd's pie, so you're getting like potatoes, carrots, probably I don't know, cream, green beans, or butter, I guess, and so we'll go through the full loop of or like the chain of how to generate all that, but the example is you generate potatoes as one of those ingredients. If potatoes don't already exist in the game, we'll go chain a AI loop to go generate potatoes as an item. We will have an AI prompt that assigns it to one of our systems. So obviously potatoes would get assigned into like farming. So then that'll chain on to generating the images for like in progress potatoes that are still growing, potatoes that are fully grown. It'll generate the routine for like how long it'll take for potatoes to grow. Um, Basically, all those systems in place for uh, letting you gather those ingredients throughout the gameplay in order to sell the item you want to sell. And a more complex example is like butter. Obviously, you're not going to grow butter in your farm or like fish butter, but you can make butter from cream. You can make cream from milk. So maybe we generate an animal that you can milk from milk, and then we also generate like these crafting recipes that inputs milk, outputs cream, outputs butter. All that gets basically generated. Uh, Andrew, if you were in the stream, I wanted to show off some of the visuals. Uh, I know that it's a lot easier to generate 2D images than 3D models, but I was playing around with this idea of like billboarded 2D sprites in a 3D world. So this guy is a 2D sprite that always faces you, and I can animate him and have him walk around in the 3D world. That guy over there as well. But I'm still gonna toy around with some of the visuals and design, but it might be cool to have like these the separation of like generated stuff is 2D. You're in a 3D world though, but it hopefully will blend together a little more. But I thought that might be a cool way to get some of the the vibes of 3D, like that RPG element, feeling a lot more like you're in the space and interacting with stuff, while also letting us generate images and other stuff for actual like NPCs, stuff you're growing, probably crafting stations, stuff like that. But this is just a little test project that I threw together just so we'd have something visual while we worked today, since a lot of what we're doing will be in code. Figured we'd have something. But yeah, I think what we can do is go ahead and start. Also, for anyone watching, I am in the Chroma Golem Discord voice channel if you want to check in, say hi, give feedback, thoughts, anything. You can join our Discord for game developers in the description below the channel. And every Tuesday I stream just some live development, and you can always jump in, hang out, ask questions, give feedback, whatever you want. But let's kind of go over some of the flow of what we're looking. I've just created a basic script for us to start prototyping some stuff, but the the general flow of what we're going to do is we're going to take in um, something you want to sell at your recipe and created a prompt for this. So we'll go with potato soup just for testing. I wrote some basic prompt system message for it, and we will have that break it down into a list of ingredients. Let's see what we get here. So we've got like potato, onion, garlic, vegetable broth, butter, salt, pepper, heavy cream. That's a lot of ingredients. We might want to tweak it to like have a maximum or a minimum or something, but basically we will take each of those and pass those through to another prompt saying, hey, can this be uh, assigned to one of our existing systems? So we've got fishing, farming, foraging, uh, and ranching, I think, for animals. Um, if so, it just assigns it. If not, it'll go ahead and break it down into like a recursive loop of ingredients. So butter gets broken down into cream, cream gets broken down into milk. It'll prefer the ingredients we've already created because we pass through that game state of these are the ingredients we've created, but it's free to create its own. Um, and then for some stuff, like I don't know how salt and pepper are made, maybe salts from like seawater or something. But for we also have a catch-all system of like a Saturday market. So for ingredients like this that don't get assigned into a system and don't get broken down into other ingredients that can get assigned into a system, they'll just be added to a pool of items that get randomly sold, some subset of them every Saturday. So if you want to sell your potato soup, you're going to be farming a lot. You'll probably do a little bit of ranching, like have a cow or two, and every Saturday or so, you'll want to make sure you go buy your spices. But this is just a basic prompt that we uh, started with. Let's go ahead and let's tweak it a little bit to prefer like lower level ingredients and maybe fewer ingredients. Uh, so let's just say like prefer choosing ingredients in their rawest form and uh, don't add too many ingredients. I don't know how well this will work, but most recipes should use around 1 to 5, depending on complexity. OpenAI now has a new JSON mode for responses, but we're not going to be using it here because we are just prototyping with OpenAI right now. We're going to have our own model that we'll use that we don't know if we'll have JSON mode or not. Generated a new response. Let's see what we got. The exact same thing. Minus, instead of heavy cream, we got cream. That's totally fine. We could just say like exclude spices. We might want to do like we might want to do like a separate system for spices that just like add flavor. Who knows? Um, I'm sure Emmett Shear would love to hop in and give some feedback. I can ping him on Twitter right now and see if he's available. But I think what we should do is, first of all, we do want to, before we move on to the next prompt, we want to change this prompt because we are using the core Unity serializer, which can't serialize arrays. So let's just change this schema to, let's say like ingredient list, and then we'll have our array that way. So it's just passed in as a wrapped object. Cool. Let's make sure that works real fast. Just get the new schema here. Let me see what model we're on as well. We're on 3.5 turbo. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, it would be nice if we can get it all working in 3.5 turbo specifically, and then we can upgrade basically to 4 or the new 4.5 or whatever it's called. Cool. So we've got our new schema. We're back to like heavy cream. We've got chives now. So we have kind of the core components the same each time: potato, onion, garlic, and broth, which is really nice. I would say for like replayability, where if you say you want to make potato soup in one game, it might have slightly different ingredients than in another game. So you'll have a slightly different play style, but it'd be mostly the same. There's going to be a little bit more uh, output randomness in like if your first menu item is potato soup and you're like, man, I have a lot of potatoes. I want my second menu item to be shepherd's pie. Hopefully you can generate something that uses up a lot of those potatoes. So now you've got potato, you got ground beef, onions, carrots, peas, beef broth, lots of ingredients really. So our instruction of not too many ingredients isn't really being followed. That's fine for now. I know GPT-4 follows system prompts a lot better. What we can do is, let's just try it with GPT-4 real fast. It's just an override for our overall system prompt. Let's see what we get instead. So yeah, now with 4 we get 5 ingredients. Ground beef, I assume, will get broken down in our next step in the chain. But I'd say that works for now. Why don't we move on to the next one? So I'm going to just take this format real fast. I'm going to say create new prompt, and we'll say ingredient breakdown. And for this, we're going to basically give it an ingredient and say, can this be fished, foraged, farmed, etc.? If not, return new items that can be made into it that fit into those systems. And then we'll have a catch-all for that Saturday market. So let's take this format. We'll say you are tasked with breaking down a food ingredient into raw components that can be, so we'll say harvested from any of the following systems. And we'll have our system list here, but for now we'll just hard-code it in of fishing, farming, foraging, ranching, and I mean, that's probably fine to start with. So, and then we'll say you've also been provided with a current ingredient list. Before, we should actually say food ingredient into raw components that can be harvested from any of the following systems in a cozy life sim RPG. You've also been provided with a current ingredient list that you can choose from, but you're free to create list additional ingredients if you need one not in the list already. Cool. So we'll have our current ingredient list here, which is like potatoes, carrots, garlic, etc. And we'll have an input format of, let's say, butter, and output format. I think we'll do the same. I mean, maybe we can actually just use our existing prompt. What happens if we put in butter here? Just, yeah, we require butter. Okay. So here, if we put in butter, we'll say cream, and ingredient name. Don't add too many ingredients. For this, we probably want 1 to 2. And let's see now what we break down butter into, but we might also want to include a process of churn. We can work with that later. Okay, obviously that works because that's our example, but if we were to take cream now, how do we get cream? We just use cream. So we probably want to say, and don't include an item as an ingredient to itself. Let's try this, and if we still get so now we're getting milk. We churn milk into cream. So how do we get milk? We churn cream into milk. I don't think that's correct. GPT-4. So the big target goal for this week's stream is mostly just to kind of flesh out the chain here for the full flow of being able to say, I want to sell shepherd's pie in my restaurant, and then having all of the prompts in place that create all the ingredient items and also the systems for producing those ingredients. So like creating potatoes as an item, but also creating the like potato seeds, if potatoes have seeds. Like the whole farming process, all the attributes on that. We don't have the actual like harvesting systems in place yet, so like the actual code around farming itself, but we can generate some of that more metadata of like how long each growth stage of this ingredient takes, how many of this item you get when you harvest it, how many times it can be harvested before you need to replant it, that sort of thing. So that'll give us a good baseline to actually build those systems around, and we can always tweak that later. But for this week, I'm just looking to get this kind of chain in place that generates all the metadata around what our hard-coded systems will use. Um, so when we switch to GPT-4 on milk, we actually get milking a cow. So a good example of some of the systems that we'll use is if we were to get this as a response, we probably need to either do a matching of existing systems to like milking to interacting with, or we need to generate a milking system in another chain of basically if you do that thing, you get this in this quantity. Or if you do that thing to this object that is created. And so it's kind of like a big old web of everything's generating each other. So I'm going to try and move pretty quickly in making a lot of these very specific prompts. And then if we get time at the end, we will chain them all together so we can see them in action. But looks like we can use this if we want to make butter. It's a bad example because obviously that's our example. If we want mashed potatoes, do we get mashed potato? We get farm potatoes. We get ranch butter, ranch cream. That's still needs some tweaking. We might want to whitelist some processes that can be used. So let's try that. Valid processes. Let's say, we'll put this in a variable, but we'll say milking, crafting, refining, combining, just some really generic things just to see if we can get the output to map to those. Otherwise we can do it manually. So I mean those are good. Might as well add those, but that's not exactly what I wanted. Boiling and melting, it's kind of the same actually. Let's just call it heating. And mixing, let's say freezing is, no, we don't need freezing. Let's see what we get for mashed potatoes. You heat potatoes, you mix cream, you mix butter. That seems fine. For shepherd's pie, and we can bake all this into like the actual cooking system. We haven't really thought through what the UI and like experiences for cooking, whether it's like super simple like a Minecraft crafting grid or if it's more like interacting with different stations around the kitchen. But if we've got these processes, it might make sense to like have a station for heating, a station for mixing, where you put items in, and we'll formalize these effectively crafting recipes here of item and process plus all these other items and processes equals the thing we're trying to get out. I wonder if OpenAI's APIs are still having issues today. Um, well, while we're waiting on that, let's give ourselves a little outline here of how we want to be testing things. So let's say public prompt, we got our recipe to ingredients prompt, we've got our uh, ingredients breakdown prompt. So when we start up, or basically this kind of code that we're prototyping here is just when you type in what item you want to be generating. So we're just throwing it here for now. What we'll do is generate the ingredients list for this item. We'll say items boiled chicken casserole, and then we will recursively make sure all ingredients are broken down. Well, let's first say assign each ingredient to a harvest system, and then if there are any ingredients left, break them down into their components, and then we'll basically loop back to 2 for that. So that'll give us all the ingredients, a system. So are we trying to generate the recipes and interactions? Yeah. We're generating the recipes, the interactions, and also the items itself, like the containers of data for what makes up the item, and we can fit those objects into our existing systems. So like farming will take a farmable object that we're generating here that will have the data of potato and how long it takes to grow and so on. I'm going to go ahead and restart Unity. Looks like it is stuck in a nice little loop. See what we got here. Cool, cool. One big challenge for us with this demo will be how to make the different processes feel meaningfully different, I think. Yes, I think you're right, and I think there will be some tweaks to do later. My approach that I'm going to go with at the start is to um, have a lot of levers that we can tweak for each item. So if you just think about like a farming game, there's not really a lot of meaningful difference in the actual things that you're farming. Like if you look at Stardew Valley, if you start out, you can buy 5 different seeds, and really the only difference between them is the number of times or the number of days they take to grow before you can harvest them. There's some later that you can harvest multiple times, and then like how much they're worth. So obviously we have those, but I'm hoping to add a few more levers that we can manipulate a little bit later when we get more into fine tuning how they can meaningfully be different. Uh, Jason, I'm never going to dark mode. I'm sorry. Um, Light mode is absolutely superior, and I will never back down from that. But with that hot take thrown out, we did not save our fresh system message. That's all right. Um, let's just rewrite that real fast. And we will include grilling in Jason's honor as a valid, uh, what did I call them? Methods, something like that. You're tasked with taking a complex or a food item meant to be harvested, to be crafted in a cozy lifestyle RPG and breaking it down into components that can be, we'll say, we'll add our system list here, but we'll just, for now, hard-coded in fished, farmed, foraged, or ranched. Ranched is such a bad word for it, like dealing with animals, but we can always come back to that. You will be given a food item that doesn't currently exist in one of these systems and tasked with breaking it down into ingredients that do fit into these systems. You can use any existing ingredients or create your own. So that's how we get it to map to, like, if we have peas, it's not going to use sweet peas as a new ingredient. It'll just use the peas we have. Let's say input format of shepherd's pie. Let's mashed potatoes. Output is potato and let's say action, I guess. Mash. And this is the most bland mashed potatoes you'll ever see. No spices, no nothing. But we can always add those later. And we will say valid actions are combine, refine, just really generic things, heat, and we'll see what it spits out. Alright, ingredient name should prefer the singular form. For this we want 1 to 2 because we're just breaking things down into like more steps to make the thing. So let's put in our mashed potatoes first. Let's make sure it all works. See what we get. And just to recap, this prompt is used, it's a second step in the process after we have broken down a recipe into a bunch of ingredients. If there are any ingredients that don't fit into one of our systems already, we're using this prompt to break that ingredient down into other ingredients that do. And we're also generating some actions that you can do that will save into recipes, so you can basically farm those lower level ingredients and convert them into the ingredient you need for your original recipe. We do want to say, let's see, your ingredients list should not include the original. Oh wait, I guess mashed potatoes and that potato doesn't overlap. Alright, so we've got 1 potato that you mash, you've got butter and milk, salt and pepper, That's a lot of ingredients, but I think instead of refine, it should probably be combine. But you know, let's check out what GPT-4 spits out instead. So to make mashed potatoes, you take 2 potatoes, you combine them with 1 milk, 1 butter, 1 salt, combined ingredients, heated ingredients. Well, we definitely don't want that. Unthreaded. Yeah, yeah. The actual library that I built has asynchronous calls, but I don't use them in the editor. Maybe that's a V2 feature. It's fine here. Um, don't add more than 2 ingredients. No text. I probably need to think through like how we want this action thing to work, but this is probably good enough for now to kind of move down the chain. We can always come back and refine stuff as we're fitting it together. But uh, another fun tip, see the checkmark icon in the bottom right of your editor. If you click the icon, that's the Progress API readout. You can write progress reports to it from doing multiple asynchronous. Oh. I'm gonna just take a quick look at that real fast. I have not seen that. What's it called again? Unity background tasks window. And I'll make this window a little smaller for your retina's sake. So you can add your own tasks to it. Progress API. Oh, okay, that's cool. It's just for the editor, I assume. But that's nice. I'll add that in, because I've been working more on trying to build the actual tools into the editor a little more and not just pushing it off till later while prototyping stuff. So I am going to go back into this prompt library and add some new features soon. So that'll probably be a good one to add. Be nice to be able to see them and not have them block the whole editor, especially a few minutes ago when we had to restart Unity because I assume the API timed out. Let's try one more here and say grilled corn. Good old. So I guess we never say specifically the action has to be a valid action, so let's throw that in. Actions performed on each ingredient must be a valid action as defined above. I guess we could repeat them here, but let's see if we can just get it to obey. Okay, so we got heat. We heat corn to make grilled corn. What's a food item we should make? We should make popsicle. I don't know how those are made, but I know you can't farm them. You got ice, you got fruit juice. Okay. Um, and we'll tweak refine and combine. The intention for refine was to like convert a single item into something else, but I guess that should be its own uh, recipe. So if we're generating recipes here, maybe we just have combine, and everything with combine put we add it to a singular recipe. My go-to with editor functions is if you call an async void do API call, you can internally do the var result equals await get data. So you can use HTTP client and task library to perform async without the annoying Unity native coroutine stuff. Let me take a look and see how I'm doing it. So in my asynchronous one, yeah, I guess I am using the Unity web requests. Do I have anything async? No, nothing's labeled async. That I don't think I've worked much with the async decorator outside of like JavaScript. What does it say that I need for that? So it creates a task. Okay, cool. Um, and then you await inside. That makes sense. Instead of yield. And do you do that because, I mean, is there a reason you do that over using like, uh, why are coroutines annoying? Is what I'm asking here. Let's go ahead and let's, we've got in our flow, we've got our original recipe to ingredients. We've got shepherd's pie. Let's just trace through what we've got so far so we know what the next step is. Shepherd's pie gives us a list of ingredients, like Worcestershire sauce. A lot of ingredients actually. So I guess let's put that on GPT-4 too. Coroutines are not async, they just run on the main thread but split execution per frame. So when you're doing an async task with coroutine, it's not really doing it async. It's halting the thread with a listener in a loop on the main thread and effectively keeps polling for a complete result. It's just redundant and messy. So it's basically sharing the resources of that thread and taking up like a pie slice of it versus async, which runs on its own thread. And I mean, obviously, it takes advantage of like leaving that main thread having all of its resources. That makes sense. It's been a long time since I've taken like a computers class that talks about like the low level how the threading resources are handled, but I guess it makes sense that there's probably a lot of unused potential in computers that, I mean, if you only have one thread doing something on a computer, it's probably capped at lower uh, processing power or memory or something compared to having multiple threads. But stepping through this, let's go ahead and say your link got censored. Sorry. Here's the snippet I used to generate voices out of 11 Labs async. Hello, Zermith. Welcome. Jason, if you want to send that link on the Discord, I can bring it up on stream too. But while I'm waiting on that, we do need some sort of link between this prompt and the next one to identify which of these can be assigned to our harvest systems versus needing broken down. So I will go ahead and do that next, but let me check out this link you sent. See what we got here. Gotcha. So, yeah, this will actually happen on a separate thread properly. Not take any of that main thread resources. I will, I'll keep this as a reference for when I have in the library already, I have versions for having a coroutine and blocking until you get a response. So it's probably worth adding a third option that we can use based on uh, the context for a proper async request. So await text would say it, but then you could also say it, then save it to a local MP3. I see. Yeah. And you're able to await multiple times within the function, which is nice. I guess you can do that with coroutines. But yeah, it's nice to have it on its own thread for sure. I'll keep this as a reference here. I'm going to create another prompt here for assign ingredients to harvest systems. And let's grab our format, just keeping it nice and consistent across the project. Say you will be given a list of ingredients, and your task is to assign each one to an existing system within a cozy life sim RPG game. I know it's redundant. The existing systems are listed below. If an item doesn't fit into any of these systems. You can have two choices how to label it. Mark it for items that can be bought and at farmers markets, or break down items that are ingredients that should be broken down into um, that would fit into an existing system. So we'll have fishing, farming, foraging. And ranching. Take out our valid options. Found your old version of GPT API, might be better to compare and contrast ideas. I see you dropped that in dev as well. Let's see what we got here. It's probably not irrelevant, but why is this high disposable? HTTP client makes connections, it's disposable. It's good practice to waterfall that up so it can be cleanly removed from memory and shut connections. Okay. I see. Oh yeah, I didn't add any analysis on the filters. Gotcha. Yeah, this is pretty clean. I think I'll probably use this for adding a async version. It's nice that all these Unity web requests work now, but they were such a pain to get working originally. It's a bit clunkier because I stored the history and let you resend it back to retain history. Yeah, I think I'm doing the same. Let me see how you're doing it. Got a message, a list of messages in the request. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I think I'm just maintaining how did I do this? Yeah, I just have the same sort of list of messages as well. Well, thanks for that. The version I did isn't great by any means. It was a quick and dirty to do the job. Just thought it would be an interesting point of contrast for the way stuff. Yeah, I appreciate that. Mine's also pretty quick and dirty, so I'm gonna look more thoroughly through this to pick out the good parts and uh, try and improve mine a little bit. But it is a good, basically apples and apples comparison, which I appreciate. Um, Back to this prompt, I think we will give it a input format of exactly the output that we get here. So we can actually just pass this text through without even needing to parse it. This is recipe to ingredients, and we have those that ingredient list. I guess we can pass through the quantities too, doesn't really matter. We will say you can ignore. Cool. Well, it can ignore it just fine on its own. Output format. So what we want to do is, we'll say match the unique name, and we will say system farming. And this will say repeat for every ingredient input. A little tip is that Unity JSON is Garbo, fails at silly stuff like needing an object root. Yeah, I hate that. Can't even support an array. And you can also use the website JSON to Sharp to literally paste a JSON result and generate the appropriate classes to auto-bind models. That's nice. I didn't know about that. I usually do that and have serialized models in the editor I can inspect. JSON to Sharp. My main problem that I didn't want to use what's the big JSON library that you have to add. I added it to a couple projects, but I've Newtonsoft, yeah. So used that a few times. I just didn't want to have to go and add it every time I created a new project when I was making so many, but it's probably been not worth that little effort fighting with the Unity JSON. Actually, Unity Analytics has that native, so if you just add the Unity package for Analytics, you get it for free. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. You'd think they would like improve their own version or something. Uh, let's see what happens if I paste something like this in its JSON. Probably gonna complain about the comments. Yeah. Let's. I mean, that's super nice. Huh. It's a great tip. And maybe I'll just switch to Newtonsoft anyway, but let's see here. We've got. Let's go ahead and pass in the actual input-output matching to make sure that we're giving a good example. And let's go ahead and just change this to milk. It's been good. Yeah, we're going somewhere for dinner. So we have a more diverse example. Properly on Saturday, but branching. Okay, and then we'll say only use systems that work. Alright, so let's go back and let's generate a ingredient list for moon pies, and then we'll paste that into our assignment prompt. The recipe for moon pies is apparently proprietary, unless I broke something. Let's see. Shepherd's pie. What do we got here? That works, but moon pie doesn't work. Unless something's broken. 1 second. Oh, okay. Yeah, I have heard that the API has been up and down all day, probably unrelated to fun news at the OpenAI offices. Okay, well, actually, one thing I have seen in the past is the 4 and 3.5 APIs are on separate servers, so sometimes one works and the other one doesn't. But I got the ingredient list that I wanted. Let's see if, right. Turbo. Okay, so at least we can still use turbo a little bit. It's not as good, but we've got our ingredient list that we want to pass in to assigning it to the harvest systems. So in our chain, let's go update that real fast. Say assign each ingredient to a harvest system. That's where we're at now. And let's see how these get assigned. Potato gets assigned to farming, carrot to farming, peas to farming, ground beef to market. So that probably should be ranching, I guess. I don't really know. Is it like if you're killing your cow for the product? Mm, I don't know what the right answer is for that. But let's try another recipe list. Let's try moon pie this time. That one's also 500. Or nor. D4. We'll just hammer the API until it works. Seems fine to me. Alright, so here's some stuff, like we probably can't farm flour. And I have no idea what marshmallows. See what we get if we pass those in. What systems they map to. So, yeah. I think we probably want to nix the whole marketability here. We'll say, or at least not prefer it. Say breakdown and market for items that cannot be broken down into ingredients that fit to our existing systems, our current systems. Just mapping word choice to what we're using here. Let's see if that prefers breakdowns for flour or something. When someone isn't working, a hammer is usually good motivation. You can get meta and explain the problem. Ask GPT to give you a list of steps that would waterfall through to a finished product using action words to go from table back to farm. I mean, I just might. I think I'm trying to kind of railroad stuff right now, but let's just do a little test here and say, oh yes, indeed. This is my current GPT-4 prompt. This is the output. And say, wait, that's not right. This is the output. So this is an example input. This is the output. As you'll notice, items are being incorrectly categorized as market when they should be categorized as breakdown. For example, flour can be made from wheat, which can be farmed, and butter can be made from cream/milk, which can be ranched. How would you change the prompt's wording to better target these items, ingredients, broken down and assigned? This is your chance, GPT. What's this new prompt? Ah, yes, formatted as markdown. See what we get. Because input format, output format. Avoid assigning to market unless absolutely necessary. That's probably the key right there. So if we were to do this, generate a response, how many of these will be market? Obviously just keep hammering it. Right. Do we have our systems listed here? Okay, so it's saying we can go ahead and, let's say, this is the new output with the prompt. It incorrectly assigns the systems of the broken down ingredients instead of assigning breakdown as the system. How would you modify the prompt to ensure these ingredients that need broken down are tagged breakdown instead Shaking our head.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like
See what we get here.
I have not been in it yet, and I was just about to say, it sounds like that should be kind of a top priority for me next week, based on what you're saying.
For example,
Yeah.
that's probably a key difference. Let's give that a
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah. Yeah. That would probably answer a lot of questions
You
too.
can do it, ChatGPT.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Amy's in a call right now, but
Yeah. I think
she'll be
to
done
kind of
soon.
answer
I'll
your
go
other
ahead and mute
question
myself
about how
for
I feel
now
about
and
my workload,
heads
I
down,
feel
code on this
like
a little bit.
I know
Yeah, it's all good. I'm just working through some of the flow. Um, Building it in. So now we're getting this ingredients list back from
I'm
the
actually not
recipe to
sure. They might
ingredients.
have
We'll
said,
pass
I'll check
that
my
on
notes real
through
quick.
to
I don't remember them saying too much
harvest
about it.
systems.
I have just been saying the EIS being replaced because I had heard my team saying that.
And that gets passed through here as the input.
Mm-hmm.
So for here, we need to finally
I am
deserialize
imagining
and
that they're going to be replacing
uh,
what's in EIS somewhere new.
let's make sure that we
So,
do get
yeah.
farming or etc. for something that actually needs to just go ahead and
Mm, yeah.
uh, say potatoes.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just want to make
Yeah.
sure that this gives us farming and doesn't also give us
Yeah, and I have a
breakdown.
feeling that, I know that
Okay,
our
cool.
team is pretty new, and for
So
example,
when we get to
the,
this point,
okay, before I say this, the seasonal
now we
readiness
want to
dashboard is
serialize our
neatly syncable in the
ingredients
flow because we're joining 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, potentially 6 different databases. And I think that's a big reason why it's so
and
slow.
for any
So I think going into
breakdown
this, I
systems,
think if I had to
repeat,
guess, these three
generate the
are going
breakdown
to live in
ingredients.
DTCVM. And
So
then I think all of
let's go
this is
ahead
going to move
and
either into NA
use
or
our handy dandy
DTCVM.
new tool
And so I'm hoping that going into it, instead
for
of going
generating the
6 databases, we'll hopefully do
object to
1 or 2. Because I think that this data is now living in here, like you said. Um, so that's going to be,
this, go over to JSON to sharp,
yeah, yes, yeah,
get our
which
ingredient
is odd.
list.
I didn't even know actually until last week that Skipper was maintaining
Let's
both of these. So I'm curious why there are multiple databases to begin with. Um, because that's the reason that our team is so dependent on flows is we constantly are needing to join databases. But if it were just a matter of joining tables that lived in one database, we wouldn't have to do that. And that would really speed up the functionality. That would make it a lot easier to troubleshoot. Um, so I'm not even sure why these two are separate databases.
just build up our little
Mm-hmm.
objects to deserialize to. Does this have nice the
Yeah,
code
yeah,
itself?
yeah.
So going over here, ingredient list.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And
Um,
yeah, they made it sound like we might have to kind of do this in rounds. Like they aren't going to really be able to take on any intakes, until they get through SEC. Um, so it's going to be a tricky spot to be in because I agree with you 100%. We need to consolidate our data
I guess we
sources
can
by a
pass
lot.
through
And
the
I think this first round of just, okay,
quantity
all of these
too. If
consumption
we
tables,
are,
do they already live in DTCVM? It sounds like they
we're
most likely
basically
do. So
getting
can
it
we go
back
ahead and
from
replace
here
those?
and losing
And
it
then,
in
yeah, if
here.
there's
So if we
one table
go
that
over
doesn't,
here,
is
we
that
should
something we can ask
also
Skipper to do? What do we do if they
have
come back and say,
the
yeah, we'll do that after
quantities
SUC? Trying to find, it might have to be,
included
we're going to
along.
have to get creative to figure out how do we get this working right now and then how do we improve it in the future.
Uses up some extra tokens, but I think that's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So now we get the system and the quantity.
Oh yeah, I think so because
Uh,
these are all coming from 6 queries in the flow that are just joined together.
make sure the quantities correctly
Yeah,
pass
which
through
when I
the
showed them
right
that,
amount. Okay, two
they said that
potatoes.
they already had a data source to replace a join like that. So
Cool.
that would be
So
phenomenal.
that means we also want
Yeah,
to add, oh, we
yeah,
have our
yeah.
quantity, but we also want public
More than
string system, and I
yeah,
guess we could map
yeah.
that to an
And I think this
enumerator,
was a
but
good
it's probably
exercise and this puts
fine.
us in a better spot. And I
ChatGPT
know
wouldn't
Yasu's team
steer
is
us
doing
wrong.
this too. So especially as people add to GitHub as well, I think we're gonna be a lot more covered than if we didn't do this
Okay,
exercise.
so here, why don't we have JSON convert? Do we need
Also,
using JSON?
um, the other thing I wanted
Oh,
to
we don't
show
have
you, if you
Newtonsoft, right?
are interested, is what's going
That's
on with the single
fine.
randomness with that export we were talking about. So,
JSON utility.
trying to keep it concise. Basically,
Uh,
when I talked to Taylor Cole, this was the solution that he suggested is adding an actual button to the dashboard and associating a table with that so that people are downloading it this way versus grabbing the data, by clicking on a field and doing the
it's
view
been
full
so
data,
long since I've
etc.
added it
Um,
manually.
this table has about 10,000 rows, and so I think that he
Alright, I'll Google.
wasn't anticipating how much data we were trying to add to this table. I started building it here, and I was able to get it so that it shows a value for every single field because Tableau really likes to do this like hierarchy method, like this, for example. If somebody exported this, these rows here would be empty, which is very difficult to work with. So I found a workaround for that. But these are the fields that I've added so far, and if I add this table to the dashboard, it will break the dashboard. And I tested this out yesterday because right now we're sitting at about 1 million rows. And right now, actually, I have a filter on, so I can see if I take that off, what happens here. Will show us this error message. So this is what I was talking to Grant about yesterday. Um,
Right?
I was thinking most people who export the data probably have filters on the dashboard before they do that. And so my thought process was if I can just add that download button to work with this table and it
Cool.
doesn't show up, unfiltered because there's too much data,
Alrighty.
would it show up if they added the filters and then they could just easily export it? And that's what I tested yesterday. So I added it to the dashboard to see,
So
and the dashboard itself
we
went
now
out if
have
I try to add
our
this table
ingredient
because it's
list.
trying to
Let's
render
go
all
through
of that
and
data, and so it doesn't even give you the
for
option
each
to filter it.
ingredient,
So yeah, and it's not even loading now, but it would give us an error message there. So this is what I think
if
Grant talked to you about
ingredient dot
yesterday
system
slash
is
today.
equal to
Like, what do we do
breakdown,
now? And so
then we'll pass it through
I
to
was
our.
thinking about it yesterday, and he said, I'm going to talk to Jessica. I'll let you know tomorrow. So while I waited for that, I just went ahead and started just trying to see what would it actually
We will
look like
pass that
if
to
I
our
troubleshoot
ingredient
with
breakdown
this. How
prompt.
many fields are actually going to break? And so I've been fixing this throughout the day, and now you can see I've
So
got
that's
one,
this one, and it
two,
gives
three. It looks like
us,
three
what's the
fields that I
output
need
of
to
that?
update. Um, but yesterday I had, there was about 25 fields, and these are the fields so far that I've updated. So this
Freeze.
is what was going on, is for order pool quantity, instead of just pulling the sum of everything that's in order pool, it's doing this fixed function and then taking a max from that. And fixed functions I'm not extremely familiar with, but I do know that you don't commonly put 21 fields into a fixed function.
Okay,
You want
so
like
we
21.
actually,
So this is
first of all, shouldn't use a
absolutely
for
the
each here
reason
because we'll
that
be
we're
editing the
presenting
list,
a
but what
different
we want
number
to
on the
do is
dashboard
basically
than would
we
people
take
to
out
it.
the breakdown item
So
from the
I've backed it
list
up for
and we'll
now
replace it with
and I've
these
gone through
items.
and I've
Um,
updated the fields to just say,
or
give me the
we'll
sum,
keep the item in the
the
list,
give me a
but we
zero.
also want to generate
And
these
the
items.
good
I
news
think
with
that's the
that
case
is
because we
I'm
also want
troubleshooting this
to
by
build the
looking
crafting
at
systems
data that Chris gave me.
from these items
So these
into
are
that.
real
So
profit codes that
let's
he's
go ahead
looking
and
at, and
also
I filtered
say
this and I exported it from the dashboard and
crafting
I filtered it here.
recipe,
And hopefully you'll notice, minus this column here, these
and
columns are
this
all
will
aligned now.
have
So that's awesome. um, yeah,
public
congrats.
list
Like we're making
ingredient
progress.
of inputs,
So
which
yeah, so the thing is, I'm going through the dashboard and I'm checking. What
let's
I have to
see where
do
that
is make sure
action
that
key lived.
all of the charts, and I've only done this tab so far, are not broken. A lot of them gray out, and so then you have to go open it and see like which fields. You have to kind of delete the field and add it back in and all of that.
Okay, so
But
it's on
I
the
think
actual
I've got
item.
pretty good
We
progress
can
on that
put
for this.
like
And
string
then
action,
let me open this guy.
uh, but I think that'll
Yeah,
actually be
I've just
on
been updating the
the recipe
fields and
itself.
then I've been copying and pasting it, into that node just in case.
So
The thing I'm being nervous
that
about is I don't
will
know what the
result
ramifications are
in
for this
an
because
output.
I don't know why we were doing a fixed function on 21 different fields.
I guess
So
each
I've just been
item
going
has its
through and
own
editing it and
action.
making sure that it makes sense mathematically on my end, that it's looking correct here, and that it's
So there's
aligning with
two
what
approaches we
I'm
can take
exporting data
here.
from the dashboard
We
and just
can
what I just showed you, like looking at both of
have
those
an
to make
overall
sure that it's
action for
aligned,
the
which
whole
it is.
recipe generated,
So
which
that's
means
good.
we'll probably want to generate multiple recipes. Like one recipe, you take water, you freeze it, you
I
get
will once
ice,
I'm more.
you then take that
That would
ice
be
and
nice.
combine it
I'm
with
like
fruit juice.
happy asterisks about it, and the
Um,
asterisk is just what do we not know yet?
I
So
think for
still
now, the
still
simplest approach that
open
we
to
should probably
finding
take
something else that's
is
broken.
let's just have a overall action
Yes.
um, for the
Yeah,
recipe.
yeah,
Let's say,
yeah. That's a good way to word it.
let's move it up to here.
Happy
Let's say
until
action,
unhappy.
combine,
But yeah, it looks like we've got three or
or
four more
for here
fields,
we'll say
and so I will go and update
action is
those, and
heat.
then I'm gonna check all of this, and
Let's
then
move that out of
I don't
there.
think it will be as big of a task for the other tabs, but I do want to double check those as well, so I don't publish this and then the other tabs work.
And
But I think this would be. I told Grant, I was like, I'm happy to
let's
wait
make
until
sure that
SCC, and I'm happy
format
to
is
do an export,
correct.
but the export isn't working, and
But I
even if
think
it were
that'll work
working, I would
better
really
if
love
you
if
say,
anyone can
in order to
export any
get a
data and it would just
popsicle, you
align.
need
Like
to combine
it seems like that
this
should happen
list of
anyway.
items or
So
heat this list of items.
yes,
And the
so that's
action will
kind of been
map
my
to
goal.
like a workstation in the kitchen. So if it were heat, you would go to the stove and add these items. Or if it's combined, you, I don't know, go to a mixing bowl and add these items. I think that's more straightforward uh, and more intuitive at
Yeah,
least, instead of having to do specific actions on each item and
right.
then question mark on combining them all.
Awesome.
So that'll work well. And here we now need,
Great. Thank you.
uh, we could put, I
Um,
mean, we
I'm
can just
gonna
put,
make mashed potatoes.
uh,
That's all I'm making, and Andrew's gonna make mac and cheese. We keep it really low key.
put an action on the
What about you?
ingredient list. I
You doing
think
the whole thing?
it'll be fine for the previous prompt. I think
Oh, nice.
we'll double check, but if we don't pass in a key, it's not going to error or
Nice.
anything.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Nice. This should be fun.
Cool.
Oh,
So here, if we go back to our recipe preparer, we will
nice. Sounds good. Well,
also generate the breakdown ingredients. and
yeah, why we were able to
recipes.
sneak this time in
So
before
if we're not
everything
editing
went off.
this ingredient list, it is fine.
Cool.
But for each ingredient, if we are given a
No problem. Thanks
breakdown
for
system,
kind of,
we
yeah,
do want
creating
to
this for me.
run this ingredient breakdown prompt on it.
Yeah. Bye.
So we'll strip all this out into functions later when we figure out uh, how we want this to be structured better. But for now, we'll say uh, ingredient list breakdown is this, but formatted properly. And let's see what we've got. We break that down into its ingredients. Let's see. So that'll give us this sort of response, and then we'll save that as a crafting recipe. So we say crafting recipe is equal to action is equal to breakdown dot action. We want inputs is that, and output is our ingredient. Yes. Cool. So we will save that somewhere. I think we can you add new scriptable objects from like play mode? Is that a really bad idea? And I guess, yeah, save it as like JSON and yeah, because it's gonna be in memory. I probably want to actually just save it to like a storage folder, and then like load all the recipes from that folder. Okay, I can do that. Let's just say, let's public save to file, and we'll write that later. Cool. So once we've created our recipe, we will save it to a file. And we will probably also have some sort of like game object, or not game object, game manager, or like recipe manager or something that will store it in from here as well. So we don't necessarily need to load it, but maybe it, I mean, we can load it in here or like a single entry point of loading either from memory or from the file later. But we'll just say to do also save it in the recipe database. Cool. So I think we're also missing one more recipe of all these original ingredients to boiled chicken casserole. And we will save that as well. But we're probably also missing a loop here if any of the breakdown ingredients also get assigned to breakdown. That's when I'm gonna pull all this out into functions so we can properly call them recursively and stuff. But for now, we'll just handle the single layer breakdown. Um, and once we've got more of like how everything should be structured, then I'll break these out into functions we can call. So we broke those down. They've been assigned to a harvest system. We want to be also creating our actual ingredients, um, like the data structures that we'll save to file as well. So I know I've got our ingredient placeholder in that ingredient list file right now, but we will move it over so we can make a proper one. And maybe we'll call these like ingredient data, crafting recipe data or something, but it's fine for now. We've got ingredients here. Let's just pull that over. We've got name. Don't necessarily need quantity. We do need system for now because we're also going to pass that through to another prompt that generates more of the flow for that system. But for now, let's go ahead and generate that one last recipe that we are missing. So let's say crafting recipe, top recipe is equal to new crafting recipe, where I guess we don't necessarily have an action for this one because do we want an action? Let's check out our response again. But it's probably always just going to be like combine, I guess. And I think that's fine. We don't need to. Let's just see what the. Nah, it's fine. We'll keep it simple. We'll say action equals combine. Inputs is our generated ingredient list, and the output is a new ingredient called this, which will to format this string since a user will be typing it in, and we'll like capitalize it and all that jazz later. Cool, so that'll create our recipe that we wanted originally. So just stepping back here, taking a look at it, we ask the user or the player, what do you want to make in your restaurant? They type in boiled chicken casserole. We generate those ingredients. Just walk through, make sure everything looks fine. So they want that. We take these ingredients, we pass those through to the harvest systems to assign them to the system that the player will use. So chicken breast gets ranching, potatoes, carrots, and onions are all farmed. We take that and we serialize it into an ingredient list. And we've created a recipe saying these things in these quantities will produce the item that we want, our chicken casserole. We save that. None of these have breakdown as a quantity, but if it did, we would go and pass that through. Let's just say, oh, okay, dot name. So it would pass through chicken breast, something like that. So then our recipe is just a single chicken ingredient list and you heat it, you get chicken breast. And that creates a recipe. We add that to the recipe database. I should do the same up here. And so now at this point, you theoretically have a list of ingredients, which we also need to persist somewhere, and we have a list of recipes. So the two big like systems to build that kind of close the loop are one is that crafting system that uses those recipes, says if you have these items, put them here, they produce the output of the recipe, and also the like farming, the harvesting systems that we haven't really built out the metadata for yet. So maybe that's the next step. If you say you need potatoes and they're in the farming system, now we need to generate all of the data for producing that in the farming system. So we can go ahead and do that now. I think for now, let's make sure these ingredients all persist somewhere. Um, but then we'll move on to that prompt. So let's also add a public save to file and a public void load from file. So here, just make sure that our top recipe dot output gets saved to file somewhere. Um, we will use like the name as the file name, so we don't necessarily need to worry about if that ingredient already exists as a file. It should save to the same file and merge. Might be worth storing the ingredient keys in a hash set in memory. That way you can avoid generating dupes, as the hash set will only ever store the unique entries. Yes, so we have current ingredient list here, but yeah, we definitely want to be storing that in order to pass it back into the prompt too. So let's, I mean, that'll probably exist somewhere else, like properly, but for now, let's just say public hash set. Um, ingredient names. And we also want to go ingredient dot save to file here. Make sure that saves. Let's go ahead and say ingredient names. Add ingredient dot name. Let's do the same up here. Cool. So that'll have all of the ingredients that we've created through the process are now stored in that hash set. Um, we'll use that hash set. We'll just do like string replacement on these system messages where we have this. But for now, I'm trying to just hard code in a lot of the stuff that would be inserted in just to move along. Cool. So here now let's think about how we want to say in this system we have potato and it gets assigned to farming. What do we do with that? So that'll be in an else here for each ingredient. We will build out the system data for ranching, farming, fishing, etc. We could try and do like one super prompt that handles all of those, but I think realistically we want to probably have different uh, different prompts for each one, just to be able to keep things on the rails a little bit. Are you familiar with the concepts of first-class collections from code calisthenics? When you have types that have collection operations, I find it makes the whole process easier to reason about and do operations like saves, etc. I'm not familiar with that. First-class collections, code calisthenics. Collections. First-class collections. Any class that contains a collection should contain no other member variables. If you have a set of elements and want to manipulate them, create a class that is dedicated for this set. So an ingredient list contains a collection, should contain no other member variables. So this is a great example of my first inclination is that I would then need another wrapper so that this can exist with just its member collection, and then another wrapper maps action and ingredient list. Okay, good. I'm glad we don't have to argue on that one. Not sure I agree with no other member variables, but I do believe you can bake operations into the custom collection types. Okay. So let's see here. So baking, you're talking about baking some of these operations into implement enumerable ingredient at the list level. I'm not sure that I follow. What would be the benefits? Yeah, you can jump in, voice.
All right, testing 1 2. Is my mic on?
Yes, it is. Welcome.
Cool. Yeah. So TLDR is when you're working with. So you've got your data types,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got a collection, which is sort of, or I guess to keep it simple, you've got an array, which is sort of a native collection type.
Right.
Then that sort of handles a base set of operations, traditionally get by index, and that's about it. But beyond that point, you're going to want to do more advanced stuff, and so you move into the space of like lists, where you want to auto resizing array. And so, what is a list but an array with extra features, right? Like literally behind the scenes, it is a list uses an array, and it just auto resizes when it reaches cap and double scale. Um, and so principally, a dictionary is just a custom collection type, as is a hash set, as is all the others, right? And so if you are, the premise behind first class collections from a code calisthenics perspective is to say, if you were saying there is something called ingredients, now again, you're saying ingredients list, I would just call ingredients because list is an
Yeah.
implicit data type structure, doesn't matter, just ingredients. If you're saying there are ingredients, then you're saying there is operations inherent to ingredients that are separate from a concept of a list of ingredients. It also means that there's the concept of a list of ingredients may or may not make sense in every context. So, for example, your collection may find value in getting ingredient 4, or it may not, or it may find value in getting ingredient by name. And the point is the inherent operation set available to you by a list is kind of irrelevant, right? Because what you want is the freedom downstream to decide to change the underlying data structure of ingredients to support your use case as the project grows. For example, you may even have two lists or a list in a dictionary, depending on caching and so on. So, long story short, you want to avoid ever directly talking to the collection type that is the underlying structure for the collection type you're building. So, if you're building something called ingredients, you need to expose whatever ingredient operations exist on ingredients. So you can say ingredients.add, ingredients.remove, and then that way you have that freedom internally, and it's not going to cause like additional conflict later. It adds extra benefits because you can then build operations into that. Like you could say get all of, or get total amount of, or fill, or whatever, if the concept of an ingredient has a min or max. A better example would be like a shop and an inventory. You could say, for example, get cheapest or get all under price X, and these
Mm-hmm.
are you're baking operations that are paramount, kind of lining up with the collection type itself because they're natively structured. Um, there's more to this too, and what's really cool with the sort of syntactic sugar of .NET. I don't know how much of this stuff you've done, but for example, if you implement IEnumerable of type ingredient on class, what it'll do is it'll tell you you must provide the one feature of that, which it'll autocomplete for you as well. So yeah, if you just have IEnumerable ingredient
Oh, gotcha.
and then autocomplete that, it should create your get enumerators for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it lets you then return the enumerator. So, for example, if you just write a for loop or a for each loop inside of the that one, the line 11, you can just say like for each in ingredient list. You can just yield return. Oh yeah, it'll even do it for you. You can just say get enumerator as the default. Either way is the same, but basically what you're saying is you can now iterate and return values, and what that does is it means you're now natively supporting for each yourself. You don't have to go ingredients list dot things dot for each, like, or you know what I mean. It's like you can say for each ingredient in ingredients, and
Mm-hmm.
the benefit of that is you can do other stuff too. Like say for example, you had ingredients was an object with a count, and
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to have a for loop that would for each, but like return one instance of each one for every time you call it, if you know what I mean. You could do that because you would just be providing your own implementation of get enumerator. You can do the same thing with things like custom indexers or custom evaluation types. So you can decide here what equality operators do, or what
Gotcha.
the more common one is indexers. Like for my own custom types, I'll often have multiple indexers. I'll have an index which is get by ID, just like list, and that just defers to the lists one.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally it's called I don't know if you've done that, but it's custom. Literally, it's called custom indexers, and that's providing square bracket syntax for your own type. So you can say ingredient square bracket 0, 1, 2, 3, but maybe you want custom indexer ingredient square bracket flour, and then yeah, there you go, perfect. So you can do the same thing with a string, and it will then let you do it. And you do basically a list.find, and so you'll internally be able to have an option to square bracket into it by either name or by key. And that's obviously the quick and dirty implementation, but you'd get fancier later if the scale's increased to switch to a dictionary. And this is kind of my point, right? You could
Mm-hmm.
decide later that doing a search every time you decide to string index into your collection is inefficient and you'd like to switch a dictionary, but because nobody is actually saying ingredient list dot ingredients, you are not tying any code outside of this to the internal data structure. That's called law of Demeter. So what you
Right.
want to do broadly is keep the internal list private, so nobody outside of it even knows what it is, and just expose the functions that are relevant to you, like counts and so on. Again, there's lots of benefits and values to this. It means you can gate your in and outs on the like on add, for example. If you want to, you can put logic there to say fail if an invalid ingredient, or you can do counts where you can have some, again, you can like rather than counting the ingredient individual classes, you could have sum of all ingredient count quantity or something, and so
Mm-hmm.
count is really a special count. So again, the specifics are entirely up to your custom collection types, but this is the point I was getting at. This is what's called a first class collection. You're explicitly saying this isn't a list of type ingredient. This is ingredients, and ingredients are their own thing with their own rules. It may internally use a list, it may internally use an array, it may internally use a dictionary, or all of them, or none of them, or whatever. But here is the functions and features of this collection type that I have made called ingredients.
Gotcha. I think what I was understanding the suggestion to be was basically stripping out that list inherently or under the hood and like changing this to items or whatever the actual
Mm.
list internal is. But I mean that seems similar but like fundamentally different. Uh,
Yeah, I mean you can do. I like it's not again. I'm not super precious about the idea. I just purely mean that later on you'll find like little things valuable. Like once you if you get into the habit of doing this with any complex type, like again, small example for a project I had once is I had a soldier and then I had units and then a soldier type of unit and I had an army and an army was a custom collection type and
mhm,
so I had a bunch of operations like. For example, one of them was execute command, and I could call execute command on directly in army, which would then iterate its own internal children and apply the operation. So maybe, for example, a gradient list can be mixed and return a new mix of whatever the ingredient is, or break down, and you could literally say ingredients dot break down and return a new object type, which is a broken down set of whatever.
mhm,
It's not again, it's not really specific. It's just more by doing this. When the question becomes later, where do I put this function that does this ingredients based operation? You don't have to put it in random class or build a utility class or whatever, because as project grows, that for you to decide a thing is important enough to make a custom collection out of it.
mhm.
You're kind of inherently saying that there's going to be more complex data associated with this at some point. There's going to be operations unique to this set of things, and that's just sort of codifying that early to give yourself a place to do that.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep this as is and try and get in the habit of that. I think, yeah, I mean, right now it
Oh
is
yeah.
very basic, but it is important that, I mean, just setting it up to
Also,
succeed.
the other one too is you can just cast that to standard. The on 19, you can literally return the other get enumerator. It's a bit of a
Nice.
hack, but yeah, but it works because it's returning the same principal data.
Yeah, gotcha.
It'll just downcast it.
Nice. Okay.
I think you have to explicitly. Yeah. I can't remember the exact. Yeah, that should be fine. Um, yeah. So that's the general idea there. And also, like I was saying earlier, it works for cool stuff like saving. So what I like to do, for example, again, slightly
Mm.
out of scope, but if you are using JSON.NET's version of the Newtonsoft JSON version,
Mm-hmm.
it has when you do a serialization and deserialization, there is an object you can send in called serialization settings. And one of the setting types is converters. You can have custom converters. And so you can basically make a custom type which extends from the class JSON converter, and it just has two functions, serialize and deserialize. And it effectively treats it like a standard serialization function where you say write string, write float, read string, read float, and you decide how to compact your data. And I do this where basically, even if something is internally stored as like an object tree, if you were to serialize that out as JSON, you might get back a big complex tree. Take a simpler example, a vector. If you were to serialize a vector in Unity, you will get back like three floats. You'll get back the magnitude and a couple of other fields, and then it has like I think in total it stores like 7 bits of data.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, all of the bits of data can be derived from the XYZ. So what you can do is you could store it as an object with three fields, but you could compress that even smaller by storing a vector as just an array of three numbers because you know what it is getting it back. And so you can basically not store it as types, but like open an array, write three floats, close an array. And so your code will uniquely read an array of 3 digits as type vector 3 when it recompiles it. And I say that to say that if you've got a more complex type like a custom ingredient or ingredients, you can come up with a really compacted, nice JSON format that matches your interest or what you want. And you can decorate the class with square brackets, JSON converter, type of ingredient converter. And just inherently, every time you serialize or deserialize using JSON.NET, it will automatically defer to that one every time.
Mm.
And you get this really nice sort of nested compacting of your stuff. So I did this whenever I wanted to store, because what I would do is I would have like, in my Pokemon example I did a while back, I I had like whatever the 400 Pokemon with all of the moves, all of the locations, all of the regions you could find them in, all of the moves and abilities. And it was like a lot of data, and so I wanted to compress it as small as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I made my own custom types for all of it, compressed all of it, and then to once you start scaling this up with like the shop and all the ingredients and stuff, you might want searching. If you want to do searching, you probably want to cache like inverted indexes and other related search structures that would make all of the other stuff more complicated. And to do that, you need even more data. So you're often redundantly storing data so that when it loads into memory, it'll happen faster, right? And so all of this is to say, early on, thinking about a custom data structure as a custom data structure lets you even do things like just have a as JSON, which basically does a custom bit of magic or a serialized function that will compress it to a smaller format. Because you don't think about it now, but that is kind of inherently the job of the collection itself, right? Turn
Mm-hmm.
yourself into a stringified version. And so if you have a dedicated place to do that, again, keeps everything slightly simpler.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's kind of the like forward thinking knowledge that it seems like it just kind of gets baked into your head as you work more with it. And I think getting those sorts of
Mm.
tips ahead of time is good to start thinking that way. I think I can already see like this class is probably all. I mean, there's problems in that an ingredient list doesn't necessarily need an action. A recipe does, which this is basically the same class over here. It's a list of ingredients with an action, and it's I think there's some thought to be done on how each class should like evolve
Well,
into.
even ingredient lists, like what I would do personally, an ingredient is just effectively, it could just be like maybe a string for a name and a string, maybe it has a description, maybe that's an intrinsic part, although probably I would just stick with name. And for me, what I would do is I'd have an ingredient repository.
Hmm.
An ingredient repository isn't a particular collection, it is just all of the ingredients. At any point, you can add, you basically build it up over time and it becomes the single entry point for all of them. And
Hmm.
then an ingredient list is just a subset of those values from that larger set.
Hmm.
And the benefit of that is rather than creating a custom class or a custom list type, I would create that as a custom collection that's a struct. Because the benefit of doing that is a struct can be comparable. Because later on, you're going to want, again, small things to think about now, but you're going to want to say an ingredient list that contains bread, chicken, and rice compared to bread, chicken, and rice again. Those
Hmm.
two things should be equal. And they won't be equal if you're using a list type, but they might be equal if you're using a custom quality operator on your own custom type. Because later on, you're going to want to start doing saying if already has ingredients. Or the other one, you might combine two objects and say, get me the set of these two as a new ingredient list, because an
Hmm.
ingredient list realistically is just a list of ingredients. So therefore, you should be able to combine any two things that are ingredient lists and return back another one. And then an equality operator of a freshly built one should match the compounded one, right? So once you get into equality operator stuff, it gets into even more
Hmm.
crazy. And I don't want to derail all of that too much. The
Oh
the
yeah.
only thing that the only point I wanted to make really was the first class collection. All the rest of it is just sort of fancy stuff down the road. But yeah, just purely the TLDR is once you start finding yourself doing for me the marker was the law of Demeter violations. Once you start doing thing, that
Hmm.
chaining of methods is a sign of it's called feature envy. It's where you are basically reaching into an object to get its child properties to do operations on its children
Hmm.
rather than just doing the operations on the thing itself. The metaphor I use, it's like going to a restaurant and asking for the ingredients and making your own food. It kind of defeats the point, right? You should have entities that do jobs and you request operations from the entities. And so, just as a general rule, if you have a thing that does complex work, it by definition does the complex work. And so, try to move those things inside of it and expose it as simpler functions. So, ingredients.add rather than ingredients.ingredients.add, etc.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I went a little fast on this one, but it's been a long time since I've heard the law of Demeter from college. It's not something I think too much about in I came from Ruby where chaining is
Mm.
like the best thing in the world, and if you can get this dot this dot this dot this dot this, you're living life great. So
And
tweaking
again, I'm
that
not
brain.
against it in cases like builder patterns and stuff, but
Right.
it's specifically it's more the when people say, like, they don't say it's a law to not have a law demeter violation. The
Mm-hmm.
trick is a law demeter violation is a code smell which indicates you may have feature envy, and feature envy is the really bad thing. That's where you're like doing the inherent reaching in and using something else's features. So law of
Mm-hmm.
demeter is just one of those like, hang on a second, is that a
Right, like a
violation? And then you kind of think about it past that point.
code smell looking like gotta think
Yeah.
about this twice. Gotcha.
Well, separate from all of that, it's just nice when you have a custom class and you could say like for each person in bus. You know what I mean? Like just nice and
Mm-hmm.
tactical. You don't need to do more complex stuff when your types inherently have their own conventions.
Right.
Oh, and one other thing too, which is really nice. Um, so actually, just for my sanity, what's in an ingredient? Is that just a string or a string and an int, or what's the?
For now, it's just gonna be the name and I have it'll probably have like a description and like an image. Um,
Okay, perfect. So this is a good example of what I mean. Name and quantity, right? So there's two properties of an ingredient. If you go to your ingredient list now
mhm.
and do an add function that takes in a string and an int, so just your standard public void add and then string for the name and then int for the what is it, quantity. Yeah, there you go. Automatic. So what's cool about that now is if you went to a different class and wanted to make a new instance of a ingredients list, you can use a really cool object initializer or list initializer syntax now, where you can just say var ingredients equals new ingredients curly brackets, and then inside the curly brackets define each set of those two properties. I don't know if that made any sense. I mean, it should autocomplete anyway, hopefully.
Well, that's not right.
So instead
Uh,
of round bracket, yeah, there you go. So instead of the round brackets, you can now do curly brackets, and then inside the curly brackets, you can just have two parameters, kind of like a dictionary. So the first parameter can be the string, and the second parameter can be the count
uh,
or the quantity.
like, oh,
So
with,
yeah,
well,
well, curly bracket. So this is like you're making a sub object effectively with the two parameters.
these are, I think I'm not following the
So
syntax.
so around so leave the open and closed at the like top level, but
Mm-hmm.
then inside like around food, so it's a second internal set of curly brackets for food for.
Oh, I see. And then I could have,
Yeah, and so like, well, that's maybe not perfect in every case. That the idea here is it highlights that because you've inherently said an ingredients list is a unique type, that type can have things added to it.
mm-hmm.
The way you can add it is multivariate. Like you could do comma new ingredient and manually define an ingredient, or you could pass in an existing ingredient by doing comma existing ingredient. But alternatively, you can also, if you have a matching add function, call it like an internal constructor, which just gives you again a lot more little bits of flexibility in terms of how you work with it because the type has its own functions of how it works. You know.
Right. And this syntax is enabled because the add function.
The add function, yeah. If it implements IEnumerable and has the add functions, it'll automatically do that for each set of contracts you have. And then of course, as because you have your indexers, you can also do the square bracket syntax. So all of this stuff sort of compounds on each other to make custom collections.
Yeah. So I can already see like if I know that I always want to have an ingredient repository, maybe when I add to an ingredient list, I'm either like pulling from or initializing in that repository. I mean, maybe that's too much for the add function, but
Yeah, or the other one is just even simply having defaults. Like if you have int quantity equals 1, you now have an option to define it as just a string or a string and an override quantity, right?
right, right. Yeah, that's true. Gotcha.
And I guess one last thing, just because it's again purely personal style that kind of goes past this. If you are going to construct a collection for multiple types,
Mm-hmm.
something that I find is useful is rather than relying on constructors, which are kind of hard to define, like the whole load from repository or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
What's really useful is in the class itself. So in ingredients list, I personally have a public static ingredient list function which returns a new ingredients list in itself,
Mm-hmm.
and then the method name would be from, and then you'd basically be able to say ingredients list dot from, pass in a repository, ingredient list dot from, pass in a numerable of stuff, or param string for unlimited param string versions. And what that does is it gives you, again, a very declarative way of saying there's lots of ways for you to create these different types of things. You'll often see this with things that are like pipes or whatever, because it'll be like create from WebSocket or create from internet connection or create from HTTP call or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that way again, it's just a lot nicer because it gives you an autocomplete all the options rather than like relying on what arbitrary collection and even like that list data. You know the params keyword.
Um,
If you put in front of that, if you put params string and square brackets, um, yeah. So in front of string on the from function,
oh, gotcha.
as in like the parameter itself is params space string, and then square brackets.
Um, like that.
Yeah. So yeah, and then change the name to just ingredient or or ingredients. Ingredients is fine actually. And then if you had a, I guess you could do. Yeah, well, I won't complicate things too much. Actually, yeah. So just go back to go back to what it was. So all I mean now is if you now go to another class where you want to make one of these,
Mm-hmm.
what's really handy is params lets you say this is n number of parameters. So you could now say ingredient list dot from, and you can pass in 1, 2, or 100 parameters, or an array of parameters. And so you've now got this sort of inherent. No, you just literally write the word now, right? Because it's an array of strings, and it'll construct it internally from the
Oh,
thing.
gotcha. Oh, so it's just like a variable number of parameters of
It's yeah,
that
it's
string.
just like JavaScript, where you can have like a variable that's like x. It's a scaling argument list, effectively.
Gotcha.
Again, all of these are entirely arbitrary. This is just it's just over time with each of these little syntactic sugars, you end up with a collection that feels a lot more declarative for what you're trying to do.
Oh yeah, I can see how it would be nice and clean to work with in a lot of cases. Does this
But again, the only one that really mattered was the first class. All the rest of this is nice to have. So I don't want to throw too
right,
much
right.
at you. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm just throwing code in now. I will clean it up after we talk, but just taking basically notes.
and then yeah, get the other stuff too. Is like add inherently because the other thing too, it's a subtle one, but you don't think about it. But when you inherit from list or you expose a list, you're exposing a lot of operations that may or may not make sense in the context of what you're doing. Because a list, if you look at what a list interface collection is, lists are enumerable. You can get by index. You can remove at index. You can do adds, removes, add ranges. You can do all sorts of stuff. And some of them may not make sense. For example, maybe you've got a read-only collection. You don't actually want to expose adds and whatever functions. And so the advantage of having that custom collection wrapper, it isn't just the stuff you can expose, it's also the stuff you can hide. You can
Mm-hmm.
basically say what is or isn't available on my yeah, exactly. Maybe you don't maybe clear has extra work to be done. Like when you clear you want to dispatch an event or you want to do something.
Right.
Maybe you don't want clear to be expressly exposed as a feature, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Or maybe I want count to like sum up all the quantities of ingredients versus
Mm.
or something like that.
And the other kind of fun side note with all of this is because you're implementing from IEnumerable, you inherit all of link statements because link is basically just a glorified wrapper on top of IEnumerable. So your own collections can now support ingredients dot sort dot order by dot where blah blah blah. So you get all of that extra as well, which is nice.
Yeah, that is nice. Huh.
But I'll leave you there. Otherwise, I could go on for forever.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all the tips. I'll jump back in and I'm gonna clean up some of the code. I mean, you've ingredient list and crafting recipe kind of duplicated. I'm gonna put things where they go and see if I can design these two classes a little better.
Nope. Good luck with it. I'm probably actually gonna go to bed. So have
Yeah,
a good one.
you too. See ya. Alrighty, stream people. I think we're gonna clean up our code a little bit and um, maybe set some goals for next week and then wrap it up. But as we were talking with Jason, I realized we got a bunch of stuff stored on stuff that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to store on it. So it's a good idea to use this to define all kinds of generic stuff for interactions too. Yeah, I think these classes in my mind are like very much part of the generation process. So a lot of them are going to have some like extra fields that will get set temporarily so we can just pass stuff between like prompts and things. Might be a better place to store some of that. But for now, like crafting recipe seems like the more like finished product versus ingredient list is kind of just a wrapper for serializing a list of ingredients back from the LLM. Although since we added Newtonsoft, we probably don't actually need that. We can just serialize into an array of ingredients. So we can probably do away with ingredient list as a whole unless we want some specific operations on it that more just interact on the basis of like having that list of ingredients and doing things like give me all the ingredients that are farming ingredients or give me all the ingredients that need broken down. It's probably a good place to store a lot of that logic instead of like redoing it in wherever we are writing that code, I guess, because it wouldn't make sense on the ingredient class itself if it's working with a list of them. But let's go back and let's look at our prototyping code that we started at. Let's just fill these out and then we'll leave them as to-dos for now. Mining, that's the other system I forgot about. But let's foraging and just leave those as to-dos for now. Let's kind of clean up the rest of this code. So this will probably, I guess we might as well clean that up now. So if we go back to our prompts, we no longer need this parent ingredient list object in a lot of it. So what we could do is check at recipe to ingredients. Let's generate this. We're gonna remove that parent object and just produce an array of ingredients, and that's what we'll serialize into. Cool. So let's say that. I'll fix the white space later, doesn't matter. So now we should get just a list of objects. Cool. Let's make sure that we can serialize that properly. Well, we don't necessarily need to serialize that quite yet, but that's exactly what we're going to pass into assign ingredients to harvest systems. Let's grab that output so we can paste it in. API is still struggling a little bit. Cool. Let's take that. Let's go to our assignment. And let's say input format is now just our array. Output format is still just our array. So let's throw in our new prompt. So now when we serialize it here, we can instead serialize into ingredient from the harvest systems. And just memorizing those real fast. Cool, so now we have our ingredients, which we'll call serialized ingredients. Or, we'll call them ingredients, and this will be ingredient data. So now we can just pass ingredients. I've gotten to the point where this no longer looks like it's spelled correctly. I've seen it enough times. Let's check out our crafting recipe. I think let's actually go ahead and serialize into a list instead of an array. If we can. Cool, so now we can pass our ingredients as inputs and a new ingredient as an output. It's probably a nice way to clean this up a little bit with a constructor on crafting recipe. We'll do that in a second. Let's take a look at this. So, ingredients is going to be these guys. Let's double check our ingredient class. We got name, quantity, and system. Cool. So we have this. Let's go ahead and create a public crafting recipe for inputs, action, and output. That'll work just fine. Let's say string for the output. I mean, we can pass the ingredients in through here. I think that's probably fine, but we can also pass a list of strings and a string for output, and we can look up the ingredients in our database. But let's say potentially. Cool. We'll just leave that as a placeholder to come back to. But that lets us doesn't clean it up too much, but we can say combine. No, I like the action first. No, I'm just a quiet guy. I'm sorry. I'm kind of just mumbling to myself at this point. Is this audio a little better? Let's go ahead and clean up this constructor a little bit. We say combine ingredients, and let's we'll create our desired ingredient up here. Say cool. So that'll create our recipe that we need to save in our ingredient constructor. That's probably where we want to be saving ingredients to our ingredient database as well. So we'll say public ingredient, string name, to save to ingredient, db, and So if we go back here, this guy, we'll say item. So that'll persist that ingredient. We don't need to save it anymore. We'll say save to file. Then go down. We can just go ahead and save our crafting recipe in the constructor as well. We should probably move the ingredient names hash set into like a game object somewhere that's more global, but for now, I don't want to add that object quite yet, so we'll say cache in a global ingredients database names. So that'll just be a lot faster lookup. It gives a hash set of when we're populating these prompts, we're gonna print out all the existing ingredient names. We'll just pull from that, probably in the ingredient database that we'll build. So we've created our recipe here, which saves it. Now we want to go look at all of its ingredients and make sure none of those need their own recipes to create. So when that ingredient is created here, hopefully the serialization process calls ingredient, but we will double check that. We'll say double check. Serializer. And if that is the case, it'll also hit that ingredient names cache. So we don't need this as well. Cool. So for each ingredient in this recipe that has a system of breakdown, that's when we're going and creating another recipe for it. That'll be in a loop. Once we've got all this cleaned up, we'll be able to recursively call that. So if any of its items then get assigned to the breakdown system, we'll redo it as well. But for now, we're just doing this one layer deep so we can get the logic correct. So if an ingredient gets broken down, let's, instead of doing an ingredient list, let's make that a list of ingredients as well. And we'll use that prompt with our current ingredients name. That'll give us, let's check this format. We should actually be serializing that into a crafting recipe so we can have this action inputs and output. So let's update this prompt real fast. Instead of ingredient list, we'll call it inputs. And we'll add output to it ourselves. Let's double check that format is proper. Hit a 500 on the API. Just hammer it a little more. Cool. So action inputs is of the ingredient format, so we should be good to go. Let's say crafting recipe, breakdown recipe. And so we'll no longer need to do this. We just say breakdown recipe dot output is equal to our ingredient. We could try and get the LLM to pass that through on its own, but you know, it can break, so we don't need to do that. And in our constructor, we're already saving it, so we don't need to save it here. Cool, so let's just say to do recursively loop more breakdowns if needed. Cool, and so for ingredients that don't need broken down, so they're already in, they've had a system assigned, farming, etc. That's when we're going to use those other prompts that we'll create in a second for generating all the metadata around that. So that's a pretty big project that we will probably save for next week, but let's kind of just mock out what it'll look like. We'll say routines. We'll have a, oops. We'll have a ingredient to farming routine. And we'll repeat that for all the other harvest systems, but let's just get farming. Let's get some reasonable output. So say your task is to generate the metadata for farming system incorporating item. Grow and harvest item, which we will populate with our item name, potato or whatever. Fill this out a little more. Input format, we will just give it potato. Output formats, let's decide what we want our object to look like. So routine's probably the wrong word, but it's almost like a crafting recipe, but for like the whole farming process. It's a, I mean, I guess since we're using a different model, we can make a farming specific one. So let's say farming recipe, why not? So a farming recipe is going to have an ingredient that it outputs. It will have probably like a plantable ingredient, like seeds or something. Say public. Let's just call it plantable, keep it nice and generic. So you plant that in the ground. We'll have a like growth stages and also a time between each stage. We could complicate that by giving like different times for each stage, but let's just have a constant time per stage. And yeah, we want a harvest amount. We probably don't need like a harvest time because from the gameplay perspective, you can just right click and harvest probably. Let's add that in and see what else we're missing. Nothing. Alright. So I think this will be fine for now. So if you take potato, or let's take carrot, I guess. I don't know if potatoes use seeds. We'll generate a carrot seed, generate a carrot, say like 4 growth stages. We'll say 3 days growth time, in days per stage, and if you plant a carrot, you get 3. So that's the output we're going to get for if it's a farming system. So let's take that. I wonder if, did this have the reverse? C# to JSON maybe? So it's a C#. That's all right. So we will say output format is a farming recipe. It has a plantable of ingredient type, which is name, carrot seed. That'll serialize into an ingredient. We have a output, which I think we can not include because we'll want to add that ourselves. We know what the output is already. It is whatever we are generating the routine for. Let's call this farming recipe though. So we also want growth stages, growth time in days per stage, and harvest amount. So we'll say growth stages. Doesn't matter really. And we'll say the values above have been given as a baseline, but you should modify each value to better represent the food being grown. And then we will just have this final instruction here, which has just a little repeat. I know ChatGPT has the new JSON format, but we're just testing with GPT real fast, and then we're going to switch to our own LLM on our server. So I haven't added JSON format to that yet, so we're not bothering with implementing that quite yet. Let's see if we get a proper response with carrot, and that we should because it's the example we gave in the prompt, but let's double check it and then we'll move on to like potato. So carrot seed, growth time in days per stage 7, harvest amount is 2. Okay, cool. So let's try potato. Yeah. Okay, so you plant a potato seed. What about wheat? Wheat seeds. Cool. So it looks like it's fine. This really basic information will be passed through to another chained LLM where for each growth stage we'll generate the in progress growth images. We'll generate like what it would harvest if you harvested it at that stage. We're just looking really high level here, so getting enough data to be able to pass that into a farming system, basically, that can be filled out further as needed. And a lot of the breakup here is just we want to be able to start the system as soon as possible and kind of offload a lot of the prompts until they're needed. So, for example, here, if you plant wheat seeds and it's in 4 growth stages, you don't really need to go through the whole process of figuring out what they would be harvested as on the 2nd growth stage until somebody actually does that. So we probably will, like, after this prompt has finished, because we do want that to be kind of cached in memory to be instant instead of waiting for the LLM when that happens. But you don't need all that information in order for players to go ahead and start planting wheat seeds immediately. Um, and there's some weird delays of like, obviously they're not going to type in wheat and immediately plant the seed. There's some delays of like, they have to go buy the seeds somewhere and it's daily growing, stuff like that. But I think having this system in place of offloading chunks and being able to present the player with some actionable stuff as quickly as possible is the right approach here. So lastly, we just want to use this new farming recipe that we've created and serialize our response back into it. And then we'll probably call it good. And yeah, on Black Friday, I'm gonna juice things up, new mic, new camera, etc. So maybe I'll be a little screaming in your ears soon. Okay, so we say prompt ingredient to farming recipe here. If an ingredient is tagged with farming, then we say farming recipe, probably this. Let's double check it. Oof. So serializing into a farming recipe with our farming recipe prompt. Oh yeah, I guess when I answered you earlier about being low sound, maybe the sound was too low to hear. Maybe I should have typed it. But this should give us our recipe. Let's go ahead and say public farming recipe. To-do store. Let's say public void save to file. Gotta have some persistence here. We'll say save to file. And let's pass in all this stuff, I guess. So ingredient, plantable, ingredient, output, into growth stages, into growth, time in days per stage. Alright, ChatGPT, autocomplete. Perfect. Cool, so here, this should be enough for us to have enough data to build in the farming recipe. So at the end of here, we will say to do chain more calls to generate images for the plantable and output items a recipe for the plantable item. That's a great idea, actually. How does the player get potato seeds? Do they have to buy them from the market? Can they break down other potatoes? Um, we already have a recipe for the output item, but we do want images for each growth stage and let's see, anything else we need? That's probably good for now. Cool. So in here, in our initial ingredient, uh, okay, so we're creating all the ingredients, we're creating all the recipes for those ingredients. We're also now creating the data that we need to plug into our non-existent farming system. But that should be the system, the flow. Basically, for the next one, we would do the exact same thing. We make another prompt for mining, another for fishing, another for foraging. I guess I can do let's do an ingredient to foraging recipe, and I'll just kind of show how that differs a little bit. Because instead of like growth stages, uh, we'll have like locations that they can spawn in, frequencies they spawn, stuff like that. So each kind of recipe will power, it'll be fed into, like we'll have a foraging system that has all of these generated recipes in it, and each day it'll say, okay, are the conditions for this item to spawn met? Are the conditions for this item to spawn met? It'll go through, spawn all those items. Likewise with farming, we'll have that farming system. It'll have all the farming recipes in place. It'll say like, this item is planted. Here's the recipe for it. Has enough days elapsed for it to progress to the next growth stage? Is it in the final growth stage? Is it ready to harvest? And so on. So let me just type up some placeholders for the foraging recipe, and then I think we'll find another stream to raid. I would like to try that out. Let's say respawn frequency in days. We'll have like a, I mean, I guess the string works. I was gonna have like a mask of coast, forest, plains, etc. We'll define those in the LLM, so there's always a whitelist. We want to store the ingredient that you actually harvest, and it'll be instant harvest time, so we don't need something like that. We know the harvest system is foraging, and that's probably good for now. Let's go check out the software and game development category, see how this works. MMO game dev, multiplayer Suika game. Irish John Games. That's the guy who raided me a couple weeks ago, so I think that's the move. Let's see, how do we do this? Great. Irish John Games. I think this will end the stream. So before I go, I want to say thank you guys for joining me. Uh, the This is a stream we do every Tuesday for Chroma Golem, where developers working in Unity. We're focusing a lot on how AI can be used both in game development, like the process and also the end game. So we're doing a lot of little prototypes like this that use AI in interesting ways. This will be a cozy little restaurant manager where you can say whatever item you want to sell and it generates all the ingredients and the farming systems and everything, so you can play the game however you want. But our previous game was a social engineering sandbox where you played as a hacker who has infiltrated a large company, and you basically play by taking over their computer and talking to their coworkers and sending them a virus file, convincing them to run that, and it gives you access to their computer and you can talk to their coworkers and so on. Before that, we worked on a little retro brawler where you brawl in the street, police show up, and you have to convince them that you're innocent in order to keep brawling through a little conversational mini game almost. Um, we have a Discord server that's linked in the description. I see Tony plugging it real good. And it's open to all game developers, anybody interested in AI. We have a lot of our tools that we make available in there. Like we have sages for each game engine. Unity is the one I use the most, but you can ask them any question you want. They can generate code. They can give you feedback on your code. Um, and we'll probably have some more events going on in the Discord soon. Maybe hosting a game jam, we'll see. And we'd love to have you guys join us. So if you're interested in coming along, feel free to check out the Discord right here. And I'm going to send everyone off to Irish John Games. Try out this new raid feature, see if it works. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's roll.
Was your stream? What were you up to? Space Games meh? I don't know about that, or do we know? I think you love them. I think you love them just as much as I do. That one we were playing the other day in Arduino was great crack. Drew, what were you up to? I don't know if you've got ads at the moment, but do let me know how your stream went. And please do share anything you like with us here in the chat. Same goes for anybody in here in the creative space. If you're a game dev and you have a Steam link, drop it in the chat. If you're a game dev and you've got an itch, you've got some... Ooh, this one's cool. Oh, that one's really cool. Except the E here is missing. Oh no, there's the E. What's this? The C, right? Got my first raid from you a couple of weeks ago. Wanted to try out the feature. Nice, True Seb. Good stuff. If you have anything at all you would like to share with us, Drew, throw it in the chat. We can check it out. Thanks a million again for the raid. Usually how we handle these things is I show off my game, my main game. At the moment we're working on a fun game because we had 5k followers, so I'm remaking a stream game that we play here called the IBR. Are we still on the homepage? We are. We're still on the Microprose homepage. What the fuck was I saying there? Maybe I like them a bit. I think you may or may know. It is a bop, yeah. Is this 46 and 2? That's Tool, right? It's a Tool remix by Ernesto Schneck. Right, I'm going to pause that up and I'm going to show you for anybody new coming in or anybody new here. My game is Rise of Piracy. It's here on the Microprose page because earlier on this year we managed to secure Microprose as our publisher. And they've got some really nice stuff coming out soon. I'm particularly excited for Dying Breed, personally. But they made this awesome trailer out of the game there about a month ago. Let me know if the audio seems okay. Huh? Game studio called Chromagola. Focused on using AI in games and doing weekly dev streams on Tuesdays, usually hacking on weird little prototypes with AI in weird ways. Nice, true. Good stuff. Like I said, if you have any links or anything you'd like to throw in the chat, you can. Franchise the hell out of it. Yeah, you're not wrong. Thanks, Warren. Sounds like Tool. Yeah, I think it might be. Starfield's supposed to be amazing. One of the lads I know played it and called it